Hey guys, welcome to the Choose FI radio podcast. Today we have a very different type of episode. It's one of those episodes where we have an announcement to make, and I'm super excited about it as it affects me at a very personal level. But the title of this episode is called The Fully Funded Lifestyle Change. And as you may remember, that title is co-opted from Slowly Sipping Coffee, who writes over at slowlysippingcoffee.com. And so that title is a little bit of an homage to what they've written about over there, but we're going to co-opt it and adapt it to a very personal story that we want to tell here at Choose FI. And without any further ado, welcome to the Choose FI radio podcast.
You're listening to Choose FI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. Choose FI, your home for financial independence online.
Okay, so a little bit of a teaser there, a cliffhanger. Yeah, I have an announcement, and the announcement is that I have made the decision with some guidance from Brad and from my family to go ahead and pursue Choose FI full-time, which means I'll be stepping out of my role as a pharmacy manager and potentially looking for part-time work to supplement, but giving Choose FI 100% of my attention. And this is a really big deal. And so in today's episode, we're going to, one, just kind of walk you through that decision tree, and two, maybe share some of the things that you should be considering as maybe you start thinking about how to transition out of a 9-to-5 or W-2 income job and into your side hustle, passion project, or entrepreneurial venture. Very excited to do this, and help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. All right, Brad, what about this announcement?
All right, Jonathan. Well, this is obviously huge news. Congratulations to you and your family. I mean, I think in speaking with you, I was shocked when you did this, frankly, and I'm sure the audience is as well. But upon speaking with you about it, it begins to make a lot more sense, and it begins to make a whole lot more sense in the world of FI, and basically what we've been talking about for the last 7 or 8 months here on this podcast. And while at first I was very, very scared for you, I now really understand the move, and I certainly applaud it. And, the reason why I was a little worried at first was because, frankly, Choose FI is not making boatloads of money, of course. So, my first thought was, oh my goodness, what is he doing? Like that, I got to be honest. But I think in speaking with you, I understand your thought process. A, you've cut your expenses to the bone, and we're certainly going to talk about that on this podcast. B, you have an opportunity here. You feel that this has become your life's project, Choose FI, and truly it's become mine as well. You and I are both spending probably 40 hours plus a week on the podcast and the community, and we want to do everything we possibly can to nurture this community and grow it, because it feels like this inflection point for financial independence. And if we can help in our way become this kind of central community point for FI, then that like I said, is literally my life's project. And I know you feel that this is an opportunity that not to enrich ourselves. That has nothing to do with it. It has to do with taking what we're so passionate about, what we've called a life superpower, over and over and over, and really help bring this to a wider audience, and to connect the audience and to connect the community that already exists. We have huge plans for this entire project and entire community. And frankly, it's difficult to do with just the limitations of time. And I know your job as a pharmacist is difficult. You work 40 plus hours a week. You have a significant commute, and then you're working 40 hours a week on Choose FI. Plus you have a new son. It's something had to give. And the beauty of this fully funded lifestyle change is that because you've been so diligent about cutting your expenses and being smart and saving money, you have the opportunity to make that choice from a position of strength. And that is the key. And that's what I really want to explore with you today.
That's the perfect summary. I really could stop with that. What's so amazing to me about this choice is that it goes back to what we've been saying. The power is continually shifting to your side of the court. And so, I get that you understand my decision tree, but I think it's important and it will be beneficial for our audience to also just to see the practical implementation of this. So you take people that are at these different places on the FI path, people like Brad that are either right at FI or fully past FI, Joel from FI 180 who is at lean FI or flex FI, slowly sipping coffee who's right at this point of considering the fully funded lifestyle change as well, Noah who's maybe approaching half FI and is doing this gap year right now. You can see that there are so many benefits to pursuing this path long before you hit 25 times your annual expenses. And I am on this journey as well, and I'm not as far along down the road as they are, and everybody's journey is going to look a little bit different, but I have an entry-level six-figure net worth in my pre-tax buckets. I have 1 to 2 years of expenses totally saved up right now, and because of both of those two things and the decisions I've made to this point, I have slashed all my extra expenses. I have paid off my car. I have paid off my student loans. My life cost about $30,000 a year. Because I have done all those different things, I have all this flexibility now built into the situation where if I even work 1 or 2 days a week, I can continue to fund our life as it is right now for the next 1 to 2 years. And I came to this decision realizing that with my current workload, I can't keep both up. Choose FI grows more and more. I think we're going to finish the year with just under 2 million downloads. And there is a lot of organizational content, preparation time, responding to emails, just the day-to-day activities of having this platform that we're grateful that it is blowing up, but there's some very real time costs that come along with this. And at the same time, my job as a pharmacist, it's very important that I give that 110% and that my attention not be split. That is a job where you're keeping people safe. There's no room for error in that role. And I was putting 40 hours a week in at the pharmacy plus. On top of that, all the management stuff that comes with pharmacy. And I was also now more and more putting 40 hours a week into Choose FI. And I have a newborn son and a wife that obviously they are the most important thing in my life. Both of these responsibilities were eating away at their time. And so I had to choose. And because I applied the principles that we've been talking about on this show over the last 8 or 9 months, I was able to make this choice. And I'm ecstatic. I'm not scared. I'm not frightened. I'm ecstatic that I have this window of time that I can just apply to Choose FI, which is my passion, and I can just see where this goes. And we can continue to provide this service to you guys and help provide you information that helps you reach your goal decades ahead of your peers. So this just feels like it's going to be a win-win. It's going to be a win for my wife, for my son. It's going to be a win for our community, Choose FI. It's going to be a win more likely for my pharmacy and my pharmacy team because all of these people deserve, all of these different areas deserve somebody that's able to give it their full attention, not somebody that's half in one place, half in another. And so I am aligning my time with things that bring value to my life. And this is the culmination of that decision tree.
All right, Jonathan. So obviously this is a complete life change for you. I mean, what's going on in your life? What has changed? What questions did you have? What conversations did you have with your wife, Danny? I mean, like there's a million things. I don't know like where to dial into it. So I'll just throw it over to you. Give me like the background on, I guess start with, you and Danny and how you guys discussed this and got up the courage to do it when frankly, like I told you, I wouldn't have had the courage to do it. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, Danny was nervous, but you could see that like I was starting to crack, trying to juggle all of these different responsibilities. And I was just starting to slip with the little things. Like I would be constantly having to prioritize my day, thinking about the next 3 or 4 things, and everything was urgent. There wasn't this queue of things. Rather, it was everything happened to happen right now because I was struggling to keep up with maybe self-enforced deadlines, but there were implications if I couldn't make things land when they were supposed to land. And to that end, I was just doing dumb stuff. Like I would go fill up the car with gas and then I would leave the seal on the gas tank off because I had already moved on to the next mental object in my mind. And that's just a dangerous and stressful place to find yourself. So she knew that like I couldn't keep both these ships going full speed ahead for much longer. Just little things like that showed that I was starting to slip. But on top of that, I had also been modeling this for a while now. I had reeled in my expenses. I just wasn't purchasing stuff left and right. We had showed real traction. We'd gotten the student loans paid off, which is something that I don't think, even though she knew I was going all in on that hand, she didn't really believe those student loans that were in the 6 figures were ever going to disappear. And then one day they were just gone. and then getting the car completely paid off. All of our debts were suddenly just gone. And then you looked at our finances and we realized that our life doesn't cost anything. Once you get rid of all that consumer debt, I got rid of all the expensive Verizon cell phones, and we're using Google Project Fi for our cell phone service. And our cell phones only cost $30 a month. I mean, basically, when you go through the pillars of Fi and you go through our episode looking at the entry-level middle-class lifestyle, I was firing on all those cylinders. And as a result of that, we were able to get our lifestyle down to around $30,000 a year. And I was able to show her that because we tracked it on Mint month after month after month, that those were consistently the numbers that we were hitting. We were crushing our food budget, and we didn't feel like we were depriving ourselves. And I was able to just show her this consistency. So I think her confidence in me and where I was leading us, grew right along with that. And then as I was doing that, I was also able to show her our savings, and we were able to relatively quickly, after we got rid of our student loans and after we got rid of all of our consumer debt, and we were still maintaining that extraordinarily high savings rate, we were able to rack up a pretty significant buffer zone, what we like to call FU money, which is that 1 to 2 years of expenses. And so I was just able to show her both of those side by side. And then the time came that I actually, and this is really what it came down to, I went to my boss and I told him that there were some pretty significant events coming up. I mean, you guys remember. So we had FinCon coming up at the end of October. We had that documentary film crew that came to Richmond for a week. And there's a few other events right around that timeline that were going to require that I take some pretty significant time off. And then the following month, we were actually going to go visit her family, which they live there in Cape Town, South Africa. And we were going to need to get some additional time off for that as well. We hadn't seen her family in a couple of years. And I went to my boss and I said, would it be possible for me to just take a leave of absence during this window? And he just said, no, no, it would not. I think you would need to step down if you wanted to do that. And my wife got that righteous anger for me because of all the time and hard work that I'd been putting in, that there was no bend there. And she just said, I think you should do it. I think you should just go ahead and pull the trigger and get out. And so I did it, and I wasn't scared about it. I said, you know what? I understand. That's completely fine. Maybe it really is for the best. And I'm going to go ahead and put in my 2 weeks. And I think my boss was shocked. I don't think that was the answer that he was expecting. I don't think you see that very often, but that is what happens when you get to a place in life where you're not just 1 to 2 months out from total financial disaster. You can make decisions that are in your best interest. So that's where we found ourselves.
All right. So I really want to drill down on this. You went to, I guess, your boss or the district manager or whomever it was and said, like, I want to take an unpaid leave of absence, right? Like you were not asking to be paid or anything like that. You just wanted to take a couple of weeks off. I assume you would have gotten all your ducks in a row before you left, right?
Yes. It would have been an unpaid leave of absence, and I would have had very clear instructions for whoever was filling in, and I would have been gone for about 3 weeks and then come back.
Okay. And his response was an absolute no. And when you said he wanted you to step down, does that mean he wanted you to quit or is it something else? I have a feeling it's something else in this regard.
Yeah, no, actually, it would have been stepping down. So it would have been moving from a permanent pharmacy manager position down to a floater pharmacist where you'd be filling in shifts. And usually those are somewhat erratic, and it's normally nights and weekends from what I've seen. But there was still a place for me within the organization, but I would lose my position as a pharmacy manager.
Okay, wow. So, right. So, the power dynamic shifts to you then, right? Which is so cool. That's what's great about Fi. And just about, even though you're not at Fi, right? Like you have that FU money, you have cut your expenses to the bone, and your life just doesn't cost that much. So the power dynamic shifts to you, right? I can't imagine that this district manager has basically ever come across one of his pharmacy managers who has this kind of power, right? Like that's really unusual because generally in corporate America, what the boss says goes. Right? That's just the way it is. So even if it's a reasonable request, it's basically up to the boss's whim. And frankly, that's not good enough. And that's part of why we pursue Fi, right? To not be beholden to someone else's whim, to not be beholden to that job and whether you're going to lose it the next day and your entire life comes crashing down, right? Because most people don't save money. But you, Jonathan, you paid off your student loans, you paid off your car, you have a significant amount of money saved in an emergency fund plus your 401ks, and the power shifts to you, right? Like, sure, you're not at half Fi, you're not at lean Fi, you're not at full Fi, but you still have power. And that's really crucial for the audience to understand here, is that this is a continuum. And every bit closer you get to FI, that's more power that accrues to you. And Jonathan's a perfect example of this. He went in with a fairly reasonable request, and it was just said absolutely no. And I love that Danny had that righteous indignation and basically said, F you, right? That's what she said. And that is just, that's really, really cool. And yeah, I mean, listen, I applaud you. I know it's a scary step. I know it's a big step, but it sounds like you've thought it through. And you know, it's almost a can't lose situation, right? Like pharmacy jobs are plentiful. You could pick up, I mean, with the way that your expenses are so low, you could probably pick up 1 8-hour shift a week and it would more than cover your life expenses, right?
Yeah, and it strikes me that I have been hearing since I first got into pharmacy school all the different opportunities that are available to pharmacists. But then somewhat towards graduation, you kind of limit yourself. And I think part of that is, well, you don't necessarily have time to go all in on a hand that might not pan out. But now that's exactly what I have. I have all the time in the world to find the exact perfect setup for what I'm looking for, which would be to keep my foot in the ring in a opportunity or position that really interests me and gets me excited. So I think that's just a remarkable situation to find myself. And it's also going to allow me to really explore this journey, both with you on Choose FI and our audience, and get a chance to just dabble with all these unique levers that we get a chance to pull along the way.
All right, Jonathan. So obviously Danny's on board, you're on board, you know, this is a go, right? Like you decided to not only not just step down and take this roving position, but to basically to put in your 2 weeks. So you're out of that job. It just was an untenable situation. And yeah, I mean, I guess if you're not going to have the support of your boss, it doesn't make sense to stay. So, you know, I completely understand that. And then, you know, talk us through like, what does the transition look like? Like, what did you have to do as far as leaving a job you've been at for a while and transitioning into basically not having full-time employment?
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting point, Brad, because at least in the setting that I found myself, we talk about having a brand with regards to the business, but as an employee, you also have a brand. There's how are you perceived by your upper management, and things are rarely stagnant. Your personal brand as an employee is either growing, getting better, or it's getting worse. And I truly felt that if I took that step down into that role, my personal brand, you know, my value to the company was going to go down into the tank right along with it. How I was perceived by upper management, my brand was going to be in their control. And so by stepping out, by not playing by those rules and saying, you know what, I'm going to hit the reset button here, I was totally able to reclaim all that power and get to define the terms on how I want to be perceived. And then when I go back in, because of the way I did it, I was able to leave on great terms. And if I were to ever re-enter the workforce with this particular company, they would welcome me back, as opposed to someone whose brand was maybe being slowly marginalized or dismissed over time as someone that just maybe the perception was they really didn't care, you know, anything like that. In contrast, I would get to choose the environment in which I found myself. And it's this concept of hitting the reset button that I wanted to touch on, because it's a concept that we talked about a couple months ago back with Noah and Becky from moneymetagame.com, talking about the possibility of trying something like a gap year. And then in the Friday Roundup, I know we talked specifically about the power of the reset button, where Becky found herself very burnt out after a few years. And she thought to herself that if she didn't step away for a period of time, she would never be able to enjoy her career again. This was my reset button. Does that make sense, Brad?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And so just based on conversations that you and I have had, I think your boss, the one who you actually put in your 2 weeks to, was kind of taken aback, certainly, that you decided to quit. Like he thought you were going to take that roving position. And I suspect, he was impressed, right? Just on a human level, like, because who does that? Right? Like, who has the power to do that? And humans feed off of power dynamics. And when that shifts, like, I think he went probably from, if I can put myself in his shoes, like from, oh, I'm just the boss, to, oh, wow, Jonathan has some power in his life. And that's pretty impressive. And I think he actually mentioned to you, right, that you would be welcome with open arms. That's not just you kind of pontificating that, like, I suspect I would be, right?
Yeah, he said that I was an asset to the company, and whenever I wanted to come back, there would be a place for me.
Nice. So that's, talk about a position of power, right? That's wonderful. So yeah, I definitely wanted to clarify on that, because I think some people in the audience would have questions about it.
No, I'm glad you did. And I think that is an important aspect to mention about the concept of FU money, that it does not mean literally giving the finger to somebody. It is not necessarily you going out in this blaze of apocalyptic fury where you're burning it all down around you and you're taking a baseball bat to the fax machine. I highly recommend to most people that you don't burn unnecessary bridges, but realize that you having the power on your side of the court, that you get to make decisions and just be honest and upfront with what is in your best interest may be the best path. And that's what I found. Operate from a place of power, tell them what your expectations are and what you are going to be doing, and then let them respond to that as they will. There's no reason to burn unnecessary bridges or relationships. And I think that is an added benefit, that if at some point I wanted to or needed to go back to this particular employer, I would be able to.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point all around. I think, Jonathan, you and I have talked about relationships and the power of your network. And now, again, not networking in that scammy, glad-handing type of way, but like actual, genuine human connection. I have credited those type of relationships with a lot of my success in life. And really, the people who we spend the most time with and who are the most important in our lives, we get a ton of value out of, and you need to nurture those relationships. So by no means, Jonathan said something essential there, that by no means does FU money mean you go out with all guns blazing and just be this horrible human being. Like, that gets you nowhere, right? Like, part of the way that I look at life is trying to take the best strategy. It's almost like a poker or a mathematical type of analogy, that like you just do what you can to increase your odds of success almost in every way. And that doesn't mean you're sitting there calculating all the time and trying to get the most out of every situation and every relationship. But if you do the right things in situations, more often than not, over years and decades, good things are going to happen to you, right? And clearly, for Jonathan, there's no benefit to going out in that blaze of glory and just saying, well, screw you, I have this power, I have money saved up. You would look like an absolute fool. And frankly, there are many thousands of pharmacies by this one company, and you would be blacklisted, right? Jonathan, that would get you nowhere. But by going out in a classy way, and frankly, in a way that this district manager has never seen before, right? In all likelihood, he's never seen someone with that power go out like that. That gives you credibility for the future. And just the sheer fact that he said you could come back to his very store means a whole heck of a lot. So, well done on that, and just a smart strategy, really.
Thank you very much. So with this transition, I had to clean up my financial house. There's some things that you have to think about, which I think it'll be valuable for our audience to consider these as well when they make these transitions. And so while I don't necessarily have all these answers for you today, because I am in the process of doing this, I kind of wanted to roll through some of the things that I have already done, and then some of the things that my wife is making sure that I will do. And this will be a way for me to hold myself accountable. The first and most obvious one is the separation of service from your employer. That then opens you up to be able to do a rollover. So all of your funds that were captive to your employer's 401k or 403b or whatever vehicle those were in, you can now roll them over into an IRA. Brad and I and many of the people in the FI community are big fans of Vanguard, although Fidelity and Schwab are also very popular right now. And I was able to roll my 401k into a new fund at Vanguard. And obviously, based on past conversations, you know that I do VTSAX for that. So I am now 100% stocks, VTSAX in my IRA.
And that's interesting because when I left my full-time job, I certainly had the option to roll my 401k out to an IRA, but I actually left my 401k with my old employer, which was slightly unusual just because in theory, I'd rather have the control and shift it to Vanguard and be able to direct the funds as I want. But what was interesting was this particular employer's 401k had the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, but they actually had like the institutional shares. So it was ever so slightly smaller expense ratio. And since I have all of my funds in there anyway, there was no real incentive for me to move it out. So yeah, my 401k, even 2.5 years later, is still with my old employer, actually.
But I would imagine that irrespective of whether or not you have it with Vanguard or whether you have it with your old employer, you are still able to track that in the software. I know I use Personal Capital to track all of my investments. Are you able to track your investments with your employer with Personal Capital?
Oh yeah, you bet. And I can log in anytime and connected. So yeah, that's not a big deal. I can track it. I can move investments. I still have full access over it as if I were an employee, but it just doesn't give me the full access to every mutual fund and stock in the world that you would have if you were with Vanguard or Schwab or Fidelity. So yeah, basically I chose to leave it there just because, like I said, the fund that I was going to put it into, VTSAX, I actually have a slightly better version of it in this employer's 401k. So yeah, there was no real incentive to move. But that is certainly, when you talk about cleaning house, that's definitely one of the first things to think about.
All right, so right behind that was life insurance. Many people have life insurance and they have some form of a plan through their employer. In my case, I had a $200,000 policy through my employer. And since I am no longer employed by that company, that policy is no longer valid or active. So my wife has it on my to-do list to go get a term policy this week. And that is on my to-doist, Brad.
Nice. Very cool. Has that been one of your cleaning house, putting everything into to-doist as well?
Yes. I'm actively using Todoist. And so right now I just use it for my weekly task. Like my wife has me go through this list of things that I need to do. And every Sunday I have to go through this very organized 5-step process to get the baby in the car and ready for church. And if I mess up the order of any one of those things, she calls me to task. But aside from that, I'm trying to be more creative. And I know one of the things that you said is that you put a massive amount of time into getting every single recurring thing that you do for an entire year put in there. And then once you've done that once, it's just set up for life. And that's the next step. I don't quite do that yet. And also the push notifications on my phone are competing with my Headspace notifications. So I'm getting a little push notification fatigue. I may delete the Headspace and just do that on an as needed, because Todoist is definitely winning on the App of the Year award, in my opinion.
Nice. That's very cool. And yeah, I shut off all notifications. I pretty much shut off notifications to my phone anyway. I just find that it drives me insane. But yeah, as far as putting everything to Todoist, I think that really is when you can trust it. And it even just random things, like actually Sun Wu, one of our moderators on the Facebook group, mentioned, he's like, I think I've got one for you that you probably don't have. And it's, when do your passports expire? Because I mean, that could be years and years and years in advance. So I went to my fireproof safe that we have in one of the closets in the house here, pulled out the passports, found out their expiration date, and then put into Todoist to renew them, let's say 6 to 9 months beforehand. So, or whatever the date was. So, I mean, just something like that. Like, I mean, I'm trying to get every single thing in my life into Todoist so I can just trust it completely. And it really does make a huge difference.
One day it will fail you.
Hey, let's hope not. Let's hope not. But I wanted to talk about the term life insurance real quick. Having life insurance with your employer, like I've never fully understood that. I haven't run the numbers as perfectly as I want to, but like, especially if you're starting young and you're contemplating getting life insurance, like you can get a term life insurance, especially if you're in like your 20s or early 30s and you're healthy. You can get a term life insurance policy for really just a couple $100s a year, especially if you're only talking, I think you said $200,000. Like, I think we have $600,000 and $700,000 policies somewhere in that vicinity, and it's only a couple $100s per year for each Laura and myself. So, I mean, and that locks you into it. And I've always, I try to mitigate risk where I can. And for me, it was always, do I really want my insurance policy through my employer when I could leave, I could get fired? And when the rates weren't that much better, and also when every year I'm getting older and I'm potentially getting into worse and worse categories for, the actuarial tables and how much my term life insurance is going to cost. So I would argue for people out there that if you're especially healthy and slightly younger, maybe search around on the internet and find a term life insurance policy there, as opposed to just being stuck to your employer, especially if you're pursuing FI anyway, and you might leave your job at 35, 40, 45, something like that. At that point, if you do still need term life insurance, you're going to be in a much less advantageous position. So yeah, just a little point for the audience out there.
Yeah, I agree. Don't take my advice on that. It was a free benefit that I had through work, so I knew it was like a placeholder. I knew I had something in there, and I was just taking the path of least resistance, which was just not setting it up. But now that illusion of security is gone. And so I am now actually going to have to do this, which is good. I mean, and it's a general advice to people. I would recommend that you not rely on your employer for your insurance and that you take Brad's advice. And I know that for just price shopping insurance, I believe Xander is a price shopping service that will allow you to get quotes from multiple companies. I'm sure that there are other providers out there that will do something similar, but I believe Xander.com does offer price shopping for term life insurance policies, so you can cross state lines and get the best deal for your family. All right, so then this is a huge one, health insurance. And someone pointed out to us recently that we had done 60 some odd episodes and we have not done health insurance. And I'm going to say this is the episode where I tell you that you're going to have to keep waiting. We don't have the perfect answer for that yet. We are researching it. I mean, I'm making this change right now and I don't have the perfect answer for you. That's how frustrating it is, how bad it is, I guess you can say. There are less bad of bad options, and I can walk you through my personal decision tree, but I can't by any sleight of hand convince you that there is a perfect answer to this right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the unfortunate truth. And yeah, I mean, we get emails about this all the time. And guys, please know we understand what a big deal this is. We really do. And we're not just like purposefully ignoring it by any means. It's just there's no good answer. I mean, frankly, we live in America. We have this mess of a healthcare system, and that's what it is, right? And we don't want to come onto the podcast and talk about all these options when, frankly, there's not really an especially good one. And it's very frustrating for us. Believe me, we would love nothing more than to have an episode or multiple episodes about how to hack healthcare and all these great options, but we just frankly haven't found them. So please know in the background that we're doing our best and we're always looking for new information. So if you have something, send it to us, right? feedback@choosefi.com. If you have something that can help the FI community, please let us know. But yeah, until that happens, you know, we're doing our best to try to find an answer. And of course, we can give you our own recommendations and what we've done, which, as Jonathan said, which is the less bad of bad options. And that's probably a pretty good way to put it.
But at least I will say that I do understand the problem. So I understand the challenges that after researching it, I don't have the answer, but I can at least tell you the obstacles that you're facing. So in the United States, you basically have coverage through your parents until I believe you're at age 25 or 26, and then you fall off that cliff, and then you don't really have any great options until you're 65, and then you become eligible for Medicare. And so we're looking for how to plug that gap. And there's just a couple things that are out there. There's a few state exchanges, depending on the state you live in, that you may be eligible for that. I believe Colorado and a few others have Kaiser Permanente. There's a few other states that have like a state-run insurance, like Washington State. I know Noah mentioned that. And then Obamacare is in place in most of the country, at least at the present time, end of 2017. And the price tag that come with those the full price tag that come with those are very expensive, although there are income-based subsidies that will alleviate much of that. The implication there being if you can get your income low enough, you can qualify for some of those subsidies, and there may be a play there. We're going to have an expert come on and try and walk us through some of this because this is outside of my scope of expertise, but this is just kind of showing you how I walk through my general decision tree. If you fall down around the poverty line, you actually then become eligible for some Medicaid programs. And those have their own pros and cons, but that is there as well as a catch-all. That doesn't help high income earners that are looking for a reasonable and affordable approach to health insurance. The other option that is outside of all those are the health share ministries, which are not health insurance. They are traditionally considered more of just sharing each other's medical cost. They come with very, in my opinion, reasonable price tags. It does seem like a viable option, but they're not necessarily as accepted across the country as traditional insurance. You may have to jump through some additional hoops. There are some limitations of those as well. And we can point you to a few articles that we have found that help explain those. ESI from esimoney.com did a great walkthrough of how he picked out one. This is actually the approach that I have landed on as a stopgap in the short term. I signed up for a health share through Liberty Health Share. I got this advice from Brad and from Ryan in our Facebook group. And it seemed like a very reasonable option for a generally healthy family with low medical cost in general, people that don't use the healthcare system very often. And it was going to be essentially, for my family of 3, it was $500 a month with a $1,500 deductible. And Brad, maybe you can weigh in on that and give me a little bit more input on your experience with Liberty Health Share.
Yeah, I've used Liberty for going on 3 years now, and I have been absolutely thrilled with Liberty Health Share in general. They are wonderful. They have paid every single claim that's come through. And, frankly, compared to traditional insurance, it's significantly less expensive. As Jonathan said, it winds up being about $450 a month for the premium for a family. And then, like he said, it's a $1,500 deductible. And then above that, it's paid 100% actually by Liberty. The issue comes in that, like Jonathan mentioned, it is not insurance, okay? And they are very explicit about this. So any issues that I have or that I've run across are not Liberty Health Share related. They're, like I said, they're fantastic, great customer service. It's just that since they are not truly insurance and they don't have these contracts with hospitals and doctors, there are instances where you can get what's known as balance billed. So the hospital can charge you some absurd fee. Liberty pays what's customary and reasonable, and then the hospital or doctor tries to come after you for the remaining amount. So that's, potentially a nightmare scenario, obviously. Luckily, I haven't had too many major issues health-wise over the last couple of years, but we have had an instance of balance billing, and it's pretty frustrating and frightening that the hospitals or doctors can accept until they don't. And that bit of uncertainty is a little bit much for me. So frankly, like, we're actually considering getting a traditional insurance plan, even though it's significantly more expensive, but albeit it is deductible actually. So you could deduct that on your tax return. So that kind of mitigates some of the additional expense. So just rest assured for the audience, and Jonathan, for you, like, I am exploring this, and you and I, while we're both on Liberty Health Share now, that might be something that, I do some research, you do some research, and we decide to change. It's a really wonderful program for what it is, and they do a great job. But again, just because of that uncertainty, it is a little bit frightening for me personally. So that's why I am contemplating changing.
And you need to understand, like, just to our audience, and we should do an episode on that, but many times when you get a bill from the hospital, it's like MSRP on a car. It's not actually what people pay. It's a starting place. It's a negotiation. And so for organizations that have enough buying power, they get to dictate what they actually want to pay. It's like when you go on Craigslist and you see a sticker price for something, you're not going to pay that price. You may lowball them, and maybe you'll land somewhere in the middle, but it's a starting place. It dictates the tone. Unfortunately, with like a health share, they come in and they try to get these reasonable rates that these larger insurance companies are able to negotiate with hospitals, which to you and I seems like that would be reasonable. That would be obvious. But the companies basically try to stick us with the cash price instead of using the same rates that they would give to like an insurance company. And that's just the nature of this game that unfortunately all of us are stuck playing. Next is just cleaning up shop. So my wife knows that we've gone through a lot of financial overturn. There's a lot of accounts that have changed, and she wants to know, right along with the life insurance policy, like, what were to happen if one of us were to pass? Is there some sort of assurance box or file box that will dictate instructions on exactly what actions their surviving spouse should take? Now, this wouldn't be as big of a deal for if I were the surviving spouse because I set everything up. But frankly, if it were to go the other way, she would have no idea where to start, no idea what accounts to log into, no idea how to take action. And so actually creating a plan for how to go about organizing our finances in case of one of us passing away is a big deal. It's not enough just to have life insurance. Your surviving partner needs to be aware of how to implement and take care of the family if that were to happen. And so that sort of directive box is something that is on my to-do-ist as well.
I think I need to add that to my to-do-ist. I know Laura's going to hear this and ask where our list is. So yeah, I think that's a really good thing for people out there that I think most of us don't want to think about that, unfortunately. But part of this FI journey is really thinking about different eventualities and planning, right? So it's kind of irresponsible of me that I don't have that. Not to mention when I have websites and everything is online, Could Laura even find how to log into any of my sites or any of my information? I mean, that's ridiculous, frankly, that I've never even put that down on paper for her. So yeah, Jonathan, thank you. That's a huge one.
You're welcome. And Laura, you're welcome as well. And Danny will now feel validated. So Danny, you're welcome as well.
Yeah, she should feel validated. That's great.
All right. And so now, as a budding entrepreneur crafting this show and seeing where this goes, there are some questions that you need to come up with how you're going to approach saving for retirement. Because obviously savings doesn't stop once you become an entrepreneur or once you pursue this path. It's still important to have a high savings rate. And it's very important to understand how tax optimization changes once you move out of W-2 income and to self-employment income. That entire structure changes. And so this is a conversation that in large part, we're going to defer until we're actually doing this story with Alan Donegan and Talis, talking about building a side hustle. And at some point of that journey, we'll use that storyline or our storyline here at Choose FI to bring on different accountants to share their perspective on how they would go about optimizing this particular path. You know, do you do a SEP IRA? Do you do a solo 401k? How do you plan for your tax bill? You know, a very interesting statistic came across my desk recently as I was reading a book, which we'll talk about in a future episode, called Freelance to Freedom. And the number one reason that small businesses fail is because the owners fail to plan for tax time or underestimate the tax burden. And that was incredible to me and shocking. So it's twofold. One, how to plan for tax season if you're a small business owner. And two, how to save for your own retirement and some of the unique advantages that small business ownership actually gives you over being an employee. So all of that is a fascinating conversation. And it's why it's so much fun that you don't have to rely on my experience as a pharmacist, but we have Brad, who has a background as an accountant, and we can actually bring accountants on the show to share their particular life hacks and tips that they've implemented into their own business practices and advice they've given to their clients. So that will definitely add to the picture.
Yeah, I agree. We definitely will defer that conversation. But I know with my other two websites, Travel Miles 101 and RichmondSavers.com, I do have a 401k with Travel Miles 101, and I have a SEP IRA with Richmond Savers. So essentially, this is very rough back of the envelope, but essentially you're allowed to defer about 20% after the calculation comes in. I think you'll see that it's 25% when you read the literature, but it effectively works out to be about 20%. So you can defer 20% of your net income from your businesses into a 401k. And of course, that's up to the regular limitations, which I believe is up to $54,000 in 2017. I know it was $53,000 in 2016. But you're not precluded from putting money into a 401k just because you're not at a traditional 9-to-5 job. So there definitely are options, and we're going to explore that in great detail with Alan and Keith.
So to kind of wrap this episode up, there are a series of questions, and I'm sure that this is not all of them, but this is what's on my mind immediately that we are going to need to come up with some answers for. And fortunately, this is tied so closely to the purpose of our show, which is making these decisions and lowering the barrier of entry for you to make similar decisions if it fits the path that you want to follow. And I think it's cool that I'm being forced to do this now, and that it so perfectly ties in with what we're trying to accomplish on the show. I'm excited that the information that we find, the solutions that we come up with, will provide content for future episodes, and that will then spur you on to take action in your own life. And then the action that you take, when you provide that back to us as feedback, will allow us to then produce future shows. So it's very much a virtuous circle, and we're excited that you joined us as we just kind of dialogued about it for a little bit. So thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this episode today. If you want to support us in what we're doing here at Choose FI, here are 4 easy ways. 1, leave us an iTunes review. If you want to do that, just go to choosefi.com/iTunes. 2, use our page to sign up for travel credit cards. If you want to travel the world with miles and points instead of your hard-earned dollars, then just go to choosefi.com/cards and get started today. 3, if you're working on the milestones of FI, set up a personal capital account to track your progress and use our affiliate link. It's completely free, and just go to choosefi.com/PC. P as in Paul, C as in cat. And 4, and most importantly, find your friends, coworkers, and family members who might be open to this message and tell them about the podcast. Have them start with episode 38, The Why of FI, and right behind that, have them go listen to episode 21, The Pillars of FI. It is a fantastic starting place. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to Choose FI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.